Hey everyone, welcome back to RM Transit. We're doing something kind of different today and talking about a number of mega projects happening around the Toronto waterfront in order to protect the city from flooding and create whole new areas. Of course, this will also bring us the North American city of the future, essentially what some European cities already look like, but nonetheless, it's really exciting, so let's dive in. So as you know, Toronto is an incredibly fast-growing city, one of the fastest growing cities in North America, and is located on the shores of Lake Ontario. Before I dive into the new mega projects, I want to explain the context. As it turns out, the lakefront has become a critically important place over the years. This is for a number of reasons. A number of fast-growing neighborhoods are in the area, including Liberty Village, Niagara, City Place, Harbourfront, South Core, East Bayfront, Distillery, and Corktown, and of course the Portlands. In addition as well to the Toronto Islands and the Canadian National Exhibition. At the same time, there is massive amounts of infrastructure in the area. The Gardiner Expressway, the rail corridor, the streetcar network, the subway, major district heating and cooling infrastructure, a major transformer station, a number of rail yards, Toronto City Airport, a major internet exchange and several data centers, and of course Toronto Union Station. It can't be overstated how massive the growth in these lakefront areas has been. And I think South Core, which is becoming an office district, able to rival the financial district in Toronto, and visually starting to rival that district as well, is sort of the best symbol of all of this. Not only is South Core closer to and directly integrated into Toronto Union Station via the PATH pedestrian walkway network, but the new CIBC Square development, which is a massive new office development, also contains the new Union Station bus terminal, which is now serving all the long-distance buses in downtown Toronto. The area already hosts a number of very tall and impressive towers, but will also host a new super tall skyscraper in Pinnacle 1 Yonge. Not only are more people working and living near the water every single year, but massive investments have been made into public spaces by Waterfront Toronto, which is an intergovernmental agency created between the City of Toronto, the Province of Ontario, and the federal Canadian government, which just shows you how majorly important Toronto's waterfront is that the federal government is involved. Not only is Waterfront Toronto leading the creation of a ton of new public spaces, largely along the waterfront itself, but in addition, the rail corridor which travels through the area is also starting to be decked over with new elevated public spaces, which is creating both sort of an underground rail corridor in the downtown core of Toronto, as well as providing really cool new public spaces, the first of which is at CIBC Square. All of this development is pulling Toronto's center of gravity south, despite all of the development in areas like Eglinton Yonge, Shepherd Yonge, etc. And there's a ton of attractions which are going to draw tons more people. You have to remember that the CN Tower, the sports stadiums, and Ripley's Aquarium are all already in the area. But of course, there's a big problem: flooding. As climate change worsens, Toronto's waterfront location will be both a blessing and a curse. While Lake Ontario can provide great moderating climate effects and a ton of fresh water, its levels also need to be closely managed. If lake levels get too low, you have a ton of infrastructure projects, not least of which are with the nuclear power plants to the east of the city, which rely on the lake for cooling. Of course, if the water levels get too high, by comparison, the City of Toronto and other cities flood. Now, the St. Lawrence Seaway, which connects the Great Lakes together and to the St. Lawrence River, is considered one of the greatest engineering marvels of all time. But what it also means is that all of the Great Lakes water levels and the St. Lawrence's water levels are all interlinked, which means that not only do Lake Ontario's water levels need to be managed, but so do the water levels of the other lakes, including Lake Michigan, where Chicago is. With the massive growth you can expect in Rust Belt and Great Lakes cities in the coming years, it's incredibly important that we follow up the St. Lawrence Seaway with new engineering marvels that manage floodwaters around the Great Lakes. Of course, if that wasn't complex enough, the lake also means that Toronto gets really heavy rainfall and really heavy snowfall as clouds are able to suck up water from the lake. These heavy weather events can lead to a lot of flooding, and particularly on the Don River, which is a major river that separates Toronto roughly east and west. It's especially a big problem since the Don River runs directly east to Toronto's downtown and through the important Portlands and West Don Lands areas, and hence, if it floods, a lot of problems are going to happen. So with some of the city's fastest growing and most important neighborhoods on the water, along with major infrastructure that serves not only the Toronto region and also the Quebec City-Windsor corridor with VIA trains, a number of massive projects are underway to connect the area, protect it from flooding, and create an entirely new district. Let's dive into those. So of course, with all of the flooding on the Don River, the lower Don Valley, which hosts the Gardiner Expressway as well as GO's Richmond Hill Line, experiences frequent flooding. This is actually one of the reasons that supposedly the Richmond Hill Line doesn't get more service. Obviously, this is already very problematic, as flooding, which happens frequently, any major rainstorm tends to cause some flooding down there. It also disconnects Toronto's core from important transportation links. So solving this problem is already an issue before we talk about all the new development. Of course, the Don Valley is also set to potentially host new Metrolinx facilities to enable regional express rail, as well as bridges which will carry hundreds of GO Transit and Ontario Line Metro trains, as well as intercity trains across the Don River every day. Fortunately, Metrolinx is doing work on its rail network specifically to start managing flooding. In areas where flooding is common, sensors are deployed so that Metrolinx can monitor whether track washouts and the like have happened. But if all these flooding problems weren't already enough, Toronto also has another flooding-related problem, which is combined sewer overflow events. Essentially what a combined sewer is something that you see typically in older cities across the world and in North America, where the stormwater sewer and the sanitary sewer, which carries waste, are combined. So all of the water from a major storm goes into the sewers where all of the waste products are and overflows them and carries them into Lake Ontario as well as streams and rivers. This happens because the processing capacity simply can't handle the massive surge of water that happens during a storm. And that brings us to our first major project, the Coxwell Bypass Tunnel. This is a large bored tunnel which will essentially act as a bypass and overflow tank, which will take overflowed sewage and stormwater and prevent it from going into Lake Ontario, streams, and rivers. This will massively cut pollution in the lower Don Valley as well as Toronto's harbour, and redirect it to an expanded Ashbridges Bay water treatment plant, which is already a major water treatment plant in the city of Toronto. Now this tunnel is big. It's 10 kilometers long and it's 6.3 meters in diameter, which is larger than many subway tunnels. As mentioned, the tunnel will run from the Ashbridges Bay water treatment plant to the mouth of the Don River and then north along the Don River up to the Coxwell Ravine Park. Now, as it turns out, the project is already super visible with massive shafts being dug to help with its construction. These shafts are gigantic and circular and lead down to the tunnel, which is 50 meters below ground, which is quite deep. As it turns out, one of these massive shafts, which also act as holding tanks for all of that extra stormwater and sewage backup, is located to the northwest of the Prince Edward Viaduct, which Line 2 of the subway crosses over. So next time you're riding the subway, take a look and you'll likely see it. Of course, the treatment plant is also being expanded, not only with new, more modern technology, but also with features such as UV sanitization. There's also a new outflow being constructed. The outflow is essentially the mechanism by which the sewage treatment plant releases water back into the water system. This new outflow will be constructed roughly 3.5 kilometers offshore, which will also help reduce the impacts of outflow on the shoreline. But as it turns out, this $3 billion tunneling project is not the only one planned for the sewer system and helping to reduce flood impacts in the city. There's an additional 6-kilometer tunnel planned to extend the Coxwell bypass up Taylor-Massey Creek, and there's another tunnel planned to go from the base of the Don River all the way over to the CNE along the waterfront. Another huge benefit of this new tunnel is that the Coxwell bypass tunnel, being a bypass, will bypass the existing Coxwell trunk sewer, which is one of the most used sewers in the city, and this new redundancy will allow it to be closed for maintenance and upgrades. As it turns out, land around the Ashbridges Bay water treatment plant will also be expanded using soil and muck from tunneling. This will help manage erosion and sediments that come from outflow and disturbance. While the Coxwell Bypass Tunnel is supposed to open in 2024, we'll see if COVID has an impact on that, the associated projects and works are likely to go into the 2030s. The next major project, and perhaps the biggest project of them all, is the development of the Portlands. The Portlands will be turned into a new destination district in the city of Toronto, with a mixture of uses and totally reimagined areas to the east of the Toronto Harbour. Now, to give you the background on this project, currently the Don River doesn't flow naturally into Lake Ontario. It was redirected into the Keating Channel, which takes a 90-degree turn. Essentially, by doing that 90-degree turn, you slow the water flow down, and what this leads to is more flooding, because the water has nowhere to go. This would obviously be a big problem, because areas like Corktown and East Harbour are major development areas, and so having flooding at the lower Don River really isn't an option. To solve this, a multi-billion-dollar project is being undertaken to develop an entirely new river outlet. Essentially, the river is being redirected. This will improve water quality, reduce flood risk, and add a massive amount of new naturalized green space throughout the Portlands. Now, the new river mouth will be built as an extension of the Polsom Slip up to the Don River. This will actually create a new island known as Villiers Island, which will feature major new parklands and some new development. Areas along the edge of the Keating Channel as well as along the new river valley will be totally naturalized, and they'll act as both a park and as a way of managing floodwaters. There will also be additional wetland to the south of the river valley, which will allow water to flow into the shipping canal in really bad flooding events. This will provide the Portlands and Villiers Island with their own form of flood protection. Now, all of this is already under construction, and the new river valley is set to open for water flow in around 2024. It will be very cool to see them literally open up a dam and have water flow into this new river valley. Of course, once the new river is flowing, there will still be substantial work to do in the area. A series of iconic new bridges is being designed and delivered to Toronto in order to connect Villiers Island with the surrounding Portlands areas. That will allow for new pedestrian path and streetcar connections as well as roadways connecting the island. There will also be substantial works to revitalize streets and redesign them in the area. This is something that's already occurred next to the TTC's Leslie Barnes streetcar facility to the east of the Portlands. Another major project is the streetcar connection along Queens Quay East. Currently, the streetcar network ends at Union Station, the Leslie Barnes, and Cherry Street, all on the edge of the Portlands and West Don Lands areas. Along with redevelopment, new streetcar lines will be constructed to connect the whole area with rapid transit, like the Ontario Line and GO's Regional Express Rail project. Of course, that will also mean a new redundant connection to the Leslie Barnes, which will improve the network redundancy of the streetcar network. In order to enable this, a massive expansion to the Union Station streetcar concourse is set to be constructed. This expansion will take it from one platform to 4 platforms, and instead of being a curved platform, you'll have 4 straight platforms. There will also be bypass tracks, and what this will enable is a large variety of streetcar routes to connect to Union Station. Currently, the station has 2 streetcar routes, but in the future it could have 4 or 5. There's also plans to completely redesign Queens Quay Station, a station I covered in a video up here. Queens Quay Station will get a new connection to the south via a pedestrian tunnel, which will mean a weather-protected connection to the Toronto ferries, and there will be other accessibility improvements. Of course, a reworking of tracks in the area will mean that streetcars can travel either east on Queens Quay or west on Queens Quay, and it will be possible to bypass Union Station as well. This is a huge value because frequently cars get stuck in the streetcar tunnel. So allowing cars and streetcars to go sort of down and then through the streetcar tunnel will hopefully mean that not as many cars get stuck in the tunnel and disrupt a massive amount of streetcar service. Of course, as mentioned, Queens Quay East will receive streetcar service, and this will come with a total reworking of the street to be more in line with what you see on Queens Quay West. That means right-of-way streetcar tracks, a cycle track, and large pedestrian promenades connecting to new public spaces. This area is sort of playing catch-up. There's a ton of development and the public spaces are already there in the area. We really just need the transit and the road redesign because currently it's a mess. As it turns out, Queens Quay will also be realigned along a newly filled Parliament Slip. What this means is that the initial phase of the streetcar expansion will be able to travel all the way east to Cherry Street. Now at Cherry Street, a planned new dedicated streetcar tunnel will be constructed to link the Cherry Street line of the streetcar, which currently serves as a branch of the King Street streetcar service, to the new Queens Quay East LRT, which is ironically what they call this project, despite the fact that LRT and streetcars are obviously different. Now, when that tunnel happens, you'll possibly see a relocation of the historic Cherry Street Railway Tower, which originally controlled part of the switches in the Union Station rail corridor. Of course, this line will also connect into other planned streetcar lines in the future, including lines which will pass over some of the bridges being ordered for the Portlands, which, yes, are designed to carry streetcars in the future. One of those lines will go down to the Polson Loop, a new planned loop to the south of the Portlands, and another line will travel down Commissioner Street, which crosses Villiers Island and then travels towards the Leslie Barnes. A final connection will be made up Broadview, which will allow for connections to the subway network, both to Line 2 at Broadview Station, as well as to the East Harbour development, where GO Transit services as well as Ontario Line services will stop. And who knows, maybe VIA services in the future. I also want to mention that all of these new public spaces and streets and streetcar right-of-ways are being planned to the same standards, which means you'll probably see more consistency throughout the Portlands, Queens Quay, the Harbourfront area than you've seen in other areas of the city. There's a big focus on preventing flooding, obviously, and that includes things like bioswale, which not only slows runoff from streets, but also pre-filters it using special types of plants. Of course, plants are also set to provide additional shading to the area, another important thing when considering climate change, and cycle tracks will be available throughout to allow people to get around easily. I'm going to be honest, I think the Portlands is going to end up looking a lot like parts of Amsterdam, with trams running through it, lots of nice green spaces, and lots of bike infrastructure, and I'm very excited about that. The last major thing to talk about is all of the development coming to the area. As mentioned, a lot of areas around the waterfront are already developing rapidly, but there's still a lot to come, especially in the East Bayfront and the Portlands areas. We can get a sense of what this will likely look like by looking at the Canary District, a development created as the 2015 Athletes Village for the Toronto Pan Am Games. Bound on the west by Cherry and the streetcar corridor, and on the east by the Don River, the Canary District is a really nice area of the city. You have nice streets with permeable pavers, something that the city needs far more of. In fact, Toronto's tried to pass a parking lot tax for a long time, which would essentially say you need to slow down runoff off your parking lots because all these parking lots lead to flooding. So permeable pavers means that you can slow down the water and it just goes straight into the ground and it more slowly runs off into rivers, which helps with flooding. Of course, there's also a lot of traffic calming, these wide open public spaces, bike infrastructure, and developments of a smaller scale than the high-rise towers we're used to seeing in Toronto. Again, all reminding me of Amsterdam. As it turns out, even this area was enabled by a number of flood protection measures, the most notable of which includes Corktown Common, which is a landform designed to protect from flooding. It's essentially raised up, that has a park on top of it as well as a number of ponds and green space. This was built to prevent the Lower Don River flooding areas to its west and as a prerequisite to other flood protection works further down. There's also a very cool, recently opened pumping station to the south of the rail yards in the area, designed by GH3, which also helps to prevent flooding. Perhaps the centerpiece of all of this, though, is the Quayside development. Now, Quayside's past has been mired in controversy. It was originally going to be a development by Sidewalk Labs, an arm of Google who planned to design a smart or futuristic neighborhood. Unfortunately, due to some of the partners in the project being less than forthcoming and due to a lot of concerns about people's privacy, the project has been cancelled. Very sad about that. Nonetheless, a number of new partnerships have recently come forward who include a number of very impressive architecture firms, and so I do think we'll get a cool development, if not a super futuristic one. These include Cobe, Foster & Partners, as well as Henning Larsen. Suffice to say, Toronto's waterfront and the Portlands in particular are transforming. And when the full build-out of areas like East Bayfront and Villiers Island is complete, you will not be able to recognize it. The area reminds me a lot of similar waterfront districts in places like Copenhagen, Tokyo, and Amsterdam, and will feature a really incredible mix of uses, from commercial to residential to green industrial. These industrial spaces being things like public transit yards. Go has their yards, there will be several streetcar facilities in the area, and of course water treatment facilities at Ashbridges Bay. It's really cool actually to have this sort of modern green infrastructure and industry in your neighborhood because you sort of feel that your neighborhood is functional. And of course, the Portlands is going to work to protect a lot of the city from flooding. With all the cool new development, you're also likely to see a lot of tech companies taking up office spaces in the area, and as it turns out, an entire area is dedicated to digital media and film production. As it turns out, Netflix, who has a really rapidly growing presence in Toronto, already has operations in the area. This also comes at an incredible time when rapid transit infrastructure in the form of the Ontario Line and GO Regional Express Rail will be connecting this part of the city, as well as the new streetcar lines. On top of that, you also have all the new pedestrian and active transportation infrastructure, which will also act as a transformational force in changing the way this new neighborhood develops. The Portlands and the Toronto waterfront are changing so rapidly, and you can expect many more videos about them. Thanks.